Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and we're back for part 2 of the offense versus the Colts. And joining me, of course, is Nik Mehta. Nik, how you doing?
Doing great. Looking forward to continuing to break down this offense. I think, a lot of bad offensive line pay, unfortunately, to talk about in this second part here.
We will get to that, no doubt. I want to talk about a little bit about the lack of exotic looks to start with, because this is something that's certainly true on the defense, where they only played base and nickel. They didn't do anything different the entire game. But in this game, we didn't see any pony. We saw 1.5 fullbacks and tight ends per play. No OL6 in this game for the Ravens, which is heavy by a lot of team standards, but is very light for the Ravens.
Yeah. So first on no pony, that's just because the lack of running. That they had 3 running backs available for the game that they wanted to play. One of whom, like we discussed, shouldn't have played even as much as he did, and so that pretty much takes out any chance of having 2 on the field at the same time. Going lighter, I thought was interesting because, as we talked about so much in the first part of what the Ravens are evaluating right now after the Isaiah Likely injury is their tight end / fullback depth with Lucas Scott as well, and figuring out how they're going to get through the first few weeks of the season, provided that Likely is not back at 100%, and if he's not back at 100%, he shouldn't be in there inline blocking. Like, that is a big risk if he's in there inline blocking. And so that in particular is what they're going to need to backfill if he's unavailable. So I thought it was a little surprising that they didn't go heavy more often to give those guys more 2 and 3, or 1 and 2 tight end, or sorry, 2 tight end or 1 tight end, 1 fullback looks, because that's the role that they would be playing if they were going to be playing early in the regular season. So that's why I thought the light offense was a little bit odd. Now, roster-wise, it did make sense to an extent, having fewer tight ends available and more wide receivers. But I thought, with the need to evaluate that particular skill set, they didn't use 12 personnel as much as I expected.
Well, they ran the ball almost exclusively throughout the game, so they had 62 offensive snaps, and most of them obviously were run plays. Scotty Washington, Mitchell Payton took over as soon as Charlie Kolar left. Charlie Kolar, great game, by the way. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit later. But I was surprised they didn't try and get Baylor Cupp more reps in that group, or potentially use more 2 tight end sets that included both Washington and Mitchell Payton to try and run the ball. It was just a little odd to me. But, the main reasons they had to play 12 had the night off. And you can start with Henry, Andrews, Ricard, and then the biggest one is Lamar Jackson. Obviously, he gives the team a different look and value out of 12 personnel in terms of what the team can do.
Yeah, it was a very vanilla offense. In ways, it is an indictment of the apparent incompatibility of Cooper Rush's skill set with a role as the Ravens' backup quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling after watching him in training camp, and especially watching him in that game, is that if Lamar Jackson gets hurt, Cooper Rush's job is going to be to hand the ball off to Derrick Henry and not fall down while doing so. And I would like more out of a backup quarterback that might need, God forbid, obviously if anything significant happens to Lamar, pack it in, unfortunately. That's just how it is. But if Lamar misses a few games, that's no reason the Ravens should automatically lose those 2 games with the rest of the roster they have in the regular season, especially if it's against some more underwhelming opponents. Rush is just not inspiring confidence. Again, a very small sample size, but I will also say this applies to training camp as well. Just not inspiring a ton of confidence. And so I feel like the vanilla offense is partially a reflection of both him and Leary being somewhat vanilla at quarterbacks, and in that way, not necessarily the best fit for this Ravens offense. I really like Leary. I will say I really like Leary. I think he throws a great ball. I just don't see the fit here.
I mean, I agree, but I guess I'll start with, did the Ravens take a step forward by spending the money they did on Rush and letting Stu Huntley walk?
I think Huntley is the type of quarterback that it's kind of funny. Huntley is the type of quarterback that you would want to get in there and mix it up in these regular season games. But in the playoffs, he just looks so overmatched throwing the ball. And to me, the hope would be that Rush is, just more confident and better throwing the ball than he has been in training camp. And I've seen Cooper Rush play better football than he has in training camp. So to an extent, it's also getting used to a new offense. But it is a reflection of how much the Lamar Jackson's legs quite literally run the Ravens offense, because there are a number of plays that Cooper Rush really you just can't call when Cooper Rush is in the huddle. There are just a number of, and not just running plays, there are a number of passing plays that, you actually, I think we saw it happen. He's not fast enough to run away from a backside defender on a naked boot. He's just not fast enough to do it.
Right. Yeah, that was the play where they asked Fa'alele also, but big ask of two different players. They asked Fa'alele to cross the formation and pull to make a pass block, which to me, that's the biggest no-no there is. He's been a good pass blocker, but you can't ask him to do that. Of course, in this game, he looked terrible getting steamrolled on the one play that ended up in the sack. But I agree with you on Cooper Rush that didn't really make a lot of sense. I do question. There's not a chance for them to get out of the Cooper Rush contract this year, but there is next year, and I think that there is a possibility that they'll move on and get a different backup quarterback then who can add more to the team than what Rush did this year.
It was kind of interesting to see Riley Leonard play against the Ravens, because I thought in the pre-draft process, Leonard was the kind of quarterback I would want to try and draft and develop on this team. You can see the poise in big games. You can see the poise under pressure. You can see making plays with his legs and having some athleticism that almost seems like necessary for a quarterback to have in this offense. He was a guy who I would have thought about picking. I do hope that they continue to take stabs at day 3 quarterbacks, maybe with a little bit more emphasis on athletic traits instead of just throwing a really good ball the way Devin Leary does. But finding a cheap backup, as long as you have Lamar, I think is always a competitive advantage worth trying to get.
All right, let's talk a little bit of workload in this game, because we had some players who seemed to be a little bit overworked. One was Keaton Mitchell, who I thought, to date has been the Ravens' single best player in training camp. And you can't usually tell this about a running back. Usually running backs, oh, well, he seems to be hitting the hole properly and whatnot. And you can't really tell how they are, because you don't really see them playing live fire, see them breaking tackles the way they should. Mitchell's been an unbelievable cutter. He's shown elusiveness and power and a lot of the speed that he did in 23 when he was the best running back ever in DVOA and 40-plus carries. The Ravens seem to have more of that guy back than I could have dared to hope, but they used him for 14 snaps and 9 carries, more importantly, in this game. Was that too much?
I think so, for sure. I think after his touchdown run, I was internally screaming for them to put him on ice for the rest of the game. I know they only had 2 guys left, but okay, you have 2 guys left and you can rotate them for the rest of the game. I mean, that's fine. Mitch, and then certainly the second he was in for 2 drives after that, I believe. And the second one, I was like, this is inviting disaster at this point. This is asking for it. I understand it being important for Mitchell's confidence on the field, something he talked about on the game. So I'm not up in arms about it, because he seems to have wanted the reps to get comfortable. And I do respect that in this first game back. Now, I would say if the next 2 games we see him play this much, that would be a real head scratcher, because we have all the information really that we would need right now. Maybe putting him in for some pass blocking reps is something I would like to see him get some more live fire pass blocking reps. But certainly we don't need to learn anything else about him as a rusher.
So we're recording this on the night of the 9th. Okay. So the game was on the 7th, of course. And the 9th, the Ravens had practice today and Mitchell missed practice. Was
Right, and they signed a running back as well. They signed Miles Gaskin. Is that who they signed today? And that is kind of the thing is as I noted, he has gotten beat up in camp. I don't know why Keaton Mitchell is on the receiving end of almost every big hit in training camp. It's certainly not anything coordinated, but it also seems like the kind of thing that shouldn't happen to a guy who's coming off an injury and could be a huge part of this offense this year. If you think about what the offense was last year and then asking those defenses to also defend Keaton Mitchell, in ways, I love Justice Hill. In ways, Mitchell is certainly, I think, the higher upside running back between the two. I think, Hill is great and has his role. This is not a slight on Justice Hill at all, but I think in terms of what Mitchell can bring to the offense, it's kind of limitless. I mean, there's you do wonder if he was healthy down the stretch in 23, how much of a difference that may have made.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think honestly, the injury to Mitchell was similar to the injury to CJ2K in the playoff game for the Titans against the Ravens in 2008. It was that kind of a enormous difference that Mitchell's absence made. But in any case, I mean, missing practice today. I don't know what the reason given was. I didn't hear if Harbaugh said anything at the podium about why he missed practice.
I can check real quick. I think even if he said something, it is John Harbaugh talking about injuries, and it's kind of standard. Keaton, he said, does not have a serious injury, just wasn't ready to go today. And again, I'm fine with that approach in camp. If a guy's not ready to go, I don't want him out there. But I also don't want guys to be in a position where they're not ready to go, right? And Keaton took what I thought has been too many hits in camp and played too many snaps on Thursday. I understand giving a guy who's coming off injury just an extra rest day. I think that's totally fine. But this is why I said the next few preseason games, I really may only like to see him pass blocking for a couple of reps to get that live fire practice. And other than that, I don't need to see it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I would love to see Keaton Mitchell basically be shut down until the regular season at this point, but they can't probably do that. Let's talk about three other players who got various amount of snaps. Carson Vincent, a guy who almost certainly will not play for the Ravens this year in a regular season game. If he does, it'll be end of a blowout kind of thing. Weird situation where he's on the roster because the Ravens only have 8 healthy offensive linemen. But Carson Vincent got 50 snaps in this game. I thought he wasn't good, but I thought he got important reps. He got important live fire reps, and he more or less held his own without giving up a number of big pass blocking events.
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of put this as charitably as I can. Is there were times during the preseason game that I saw very clearly why the Ravens drafted Carson Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
There were also times very clearly why I saw that he was a 5th round pick.
That
right?
Every other team passed on him 4 times.
Right. Exactly. I think the thing you note about Vincent, and I was actually a little bit, I was quite pleased by this, was it felt like he was trying to lose slowly. I don't think he was always successful in losing slowly. He did get beat quickly on a number of reps, but it looked like he could tell when he was starting to lose and was really focused on trying to give his quarterback as much time as he could. I would say that's probably something George Warhop has been, coaching him up on, and not, don't let these guys blow by you. And even when they're starting to beat you, just hold on, just not hold literally hold on for dear life, but hold on for dear life and just give your quarterback the extra half second because it makes a difference.
Well, I think that you hit on an important point, is that he sets very deep for a tackle in this league. Now, normally tackles like to play in space and they like to create a pocket, but they have options in terms of how deep they set relative to the other linemen. He sets very deep, and I think that if I were trying to correct something about the way he played, I'd say set less deep, use your punch, use your length, which is outstanding for Carson Vincent, to try and get in better position. But we've seen all OTAs, all camps so far that Carson Vincent is probably the most
he's the biggest
under
project.
the microscope of any offensive lineman.
Oh,
Warhop is going to him in terms of giving him additional coaching, rep after rep. I mean, he really has gotten by in college with a different set of physical skills that have allowed him to do well against lesser players. He can't do that anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of the same point. He's Warhop's biggest project. You know, he was drafted. Warhop, I believe, if I remember correctly, Warhop wanted him. Warhop wanted the guy from Alabama A&M because he saw the frame. And in a way, when a coach does that, they're calling their shot about their ability to coach a guy. I mean, yeah, they're making a commentary about what they've seen physically, and maybe they've talked to the player and what they believe he can, do mentally, whatever. But it is still very much a coach's confidence in themselves to get that job done. And well, that's why Warhop's on him. Warhop's on him because he's his guy. And so that's not a negative thing on either of them. I actually think that that's a good working relationship to develop right away with a rookie. Let him know, hey, we have high hopes for you. We want you to get there. We believe you can get there. And because of that, we are going to be on you. I am going to be on you. So, what I saw out of Vincent on Thursday night was less about, when is he going to be ready, and more about just how did he look matching up against the level of talent that he was playing. And again, he was playing some second and third team talent. But I think Noteboom only played maybe a dozen or so snaps of left tackle before he moved to the right side to get some snaps there and obviously get Vincent in the game. So, Vincent, another very large human being, and played plenty of snaps and didn't appear to have any issues on that end. Hasn't appeared to have any kind of conditioning issues as much as I've seen him throughout camp.
Right.
So getting, again, that long action is, it didn't look great. There's no really other way to say it. It didn't look great at times. But as far as a project left tackle's preseason debut, that's pretty much what you expect. And I didn't want too much more than that, I guess.
Yeah, this is the play that Carson Vincent is going to get for 2025 for sure, but maybe for 2026 also, is 50 snaps a game if he's lucky for 2 consecutive years and 3 preseason games. So it'll be 300 snaps of total live fire. He's got the joint practices to look at as well, but I thought it was terrific they got him out there for 50 snaps. I think he might see a similar workload the next 2 games. In fact, Noteboom is one of the guys that I want them to make sure they keep him bubble wrapped for the season because he's the Ravens' most important backup.
And I saw all I needed to see from Joe Noteboom on Thursday night. I was extreme. I mean, he doesn't carry it, but he's almost 320 pounds. At least that's his listed weight. He doesn't quite look it and carry it that way in camp, but he moves so quickly. I thought his footwork, I was really, really impressed by his footwork. He is the first one off that ball. He is close to false starting on some of those plays with how quick that he is off the ball. I feel like I've not seen a Raven come off the ball that quickly in a little time. I mean, Stanley was having those alignment issues, and then the refs were honestly being unfair to him last year. And I think that affected where he was lining up and how quick he was firing off the ball just because he was afraid of getting the penalties again. But Noteboom, I was just so impressed with his pass sets. I felt that every time he was dictating the terms of engagement with the edge rusher. Really, probably the brightest spot in the Ravens offensive line on Thursday night was Noteboom. Made me feel so confident about him as the swing tackle this year. To spell if either Rosengarten or Ronnie Stanley should miss any time. Obviously, again, significant injury would be a bigger deal, but the Ravens seem like they're able to identify and sign these vet swing tackles seemingly every offseason to fill that need, and it is a significant need, and that allows them to have a guy like Vincent on the roster just to develop.
So Josh Jones last year clearly was that guy and had value and not too much of a cost. They've also failed in that regard. Alejandro Villanueva is a guy who didn't work out. So The ideal situation is we don't really see Joe Noteboom the entire year. That said, I still think he's the Ravens' most important backup, probably at any position, in terms of what he brings to the team.
Yeah, I think just the drop off from him to pretty much every other lineman on the roster, but especially at tackle, is more significant than the drop off from Hill to Mitchell or from the receivers and so on and so forth. But Noteboom is a guy who hasn't been able to hold down a starting job in this league, and he wasn't even a coveted swing this offseason, a coveted veteran swing this offseason. And so, I just think it's a good find. Hopefully he doesn't have to play too much. I am very curious to see who will be the sixth offensive lineman this year for the Ravens and how often that is used. Last year,
sixth?
Yes. It was last year, it was Ben Cleveland early on and then Josh Jones. I thought, or maybe it was Ben Cleveland as a sixth lineman in 23. And then,
okay. Now, do you mean who's the sixth offensive lineman in 6 OL sets?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I realized as I was saying, I meant in these in 6 offensive lineman sets, who's going to be the sixth on the field, because obviously the sixth O lineman in general depends on the position. But yeah, 6 O lineman sets, which you and I discussed, I think, quite a bit last year at how effective those 6 O line jumbo sets were. And so it was Josh Jones last year. He was the swing tackle and the 6th O line. That would suggest that Noteboom might be in a similar role this year, especially with how good he has looked. But Ben Cleveland, who I think we can maybe talk about now, has also been in that 6th offensive lineman role before. I think it was in 23, certainly. I feel like we saw him a couple times in 24, and then they kind of went to Jones more as the 6th lineman as the season went on. Cleveland, I thought, had an excellent night at left guard, both him and Andrew. I mean, Voorhees played very little, very clear he's going to be the starter. I saw Voorhees maul some guys in a way that I feel like we haven't seen from him in the past. And I thought Ben Cleveland had just a very, very capable day. At left guard, I feel like every time he gets put into a game, he holds up. He may not be the best player, and he's probably going to be no better than your third, and he's probably usually going to be your 4th or 5th best player on the O-line. But I felt that he held up at left guard. He certainly didn't do enough to try and turn the left guard competition around. But Cleveland is the only interior depth that I feel good about right now.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. And most teams don't have 2 or 3 guys on the interior offensive line that are all ready to go. And you think, oh boy, any of these guys, they're all fine, kind of thing. So if you have one, you're actually in a pretty good shape. Cleveland got let down a little bit by Nick Samac on the sack fumble to end the half. That Samac was very slow getting over to pick up the pick play that had been set by, I think it was Adebawore who set the pick initially. He's the guy with the sack earlier. And he set the pick on this play. And Samac, you can see, is like he's got the complete wrong angle. And that meant that Cleveland had to maintain that block and hope that Leary got the ball out on time, which he didn't. And then obviously the sack occurred. But I thought I'm in agreement with you. Cleveland, I thought, played a pretty good night.
Yeah, Tez Walker. He did dive on that fumble, and I do think Ben Cleveland.
Yeah, that was a good point.
There's a knock on Ben Cleveland as a guy who's in Harbaugh's doghouse. Maybe someday in my life I will get to the mystery of understand the mystery of Ben Cleveland in Baltimore. But I will say that diving on a fumble and being the first guy to see that and get on it is just good for a guy who's fighting for a roster spot and has been in the doghouse before. It's good to get a little extra something.
Yeah, Tez Walker, the guy we're going to talk about next, obviously had the first chance of that ball, didn't collect it for whatever reason. He played 45 snaps on the night. Tez Walker getting a real opportunity to get in there for additional snaps. And there's a lot of wide receivers competing with him for playing time. Dayton Wade, and then we didn't see Cunningham till later. Cunningham is the guy who's got the football a lot with the 2s and 3s this year. Kirkwood, and Wade for that matter. I mean, it was a big night for Walker. Walker played 45 snaps and had an up and down night. Some good things. Drew a great DPI penalty on that left sideline where he maintained focus on the football and still caught it despite the DPI, even though it was out of bounds. What did you think about Tez Walker's play of this game?
So the reason that I have been cautiously optimistic about Tez Walker at camp is that unlike past young camp breakouts, he's not making a contested catch over some random cornerback every practice, and that's what we're so excited about. What has impressed me is the small bits of his development, particularly developing his route tree. I've talked about this a number of times. His situation at North Carolina resulted him in being a largely vertical threat in his final year there, and the Ravens drafted him under the premise that his performance in college was less about what he could do and was more about what he was asked to do. And so, last year, first year, especially after a slightly shortened college year, not surprising that he didn't get much run, but I have been encouraged by just his general diversity of his routes that we see him get separation on. He's a guy who has the speed to separate on shallow crossers, for example, but I didn't feel like we saw him burst out of his breaks to do that and navigate the traffic over the middle of the field the way that he has. And the other thing is just his hands. I feel like his hands have just looked pretty sharp throughout camp. And he's doing, I know it's kind of a cliche phrase, but doing the little things right. Includes things like just dropping the ball, sitting down in the right spot in zone, I feel like has been a pretty marked improvement of his as well. So it's kind of all these consistent little things that get me more excited about Tez Walker than a really big play. I didn't feel like those showed up a ton on Thursday night. But again, I do feel like a large portion of that was due to the poor quarterback play. A lot of balls he just never had a chance on, or the quarterback was getting pressured. And there was one dig route that he had open, and I don't think it was the same play as the sack fumble, but it was a dig route he had open, and the quarterback just had no chance of getting him the ball.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm in agreement there, and certainly the play on the left sideline where he caught the ball despite the pass interference is one of the really nice telling factors. But what's been Tez Walker's the thing that's holding him back is having the comeback route that complements those good vertical routes. He can run 7, 8, 9 as well as anybody, and 9 in particular. But he needs to have a comeback route that he can sell to an opposing cornerback and force him, even though he has to sink his hips further than Zay Flowers, certainly, to show that route is coming. He has to be able to sell that to the opposing cornerback in order to make that deep route a viable option and run away from receivers. He's got good speed, but he doesn't have the speed of a James Worthy or a Wiggins to try and get away from people who otherwise are trying to cover him single one-on-one. Walker, I think the most critical phase of his development is going to be figuring out how he gets the complementary comeback route, and we've seen, I think, some evidence of that coming around in camp this year. I just want to see more.
Yeah, kind of two things on that. One, I think I pushed back a little bit on the speed thing. I know he doesn't have that elite tier 1 speed. Mm-hmm. He is fast enough to separate on crossers. I felt like that is
good point.
And that's the way he's developed this year. And his dig routes in particular, I noticed, are much sharper when he's coming out of the break than his other routes that require him to change direction as suddenly. I also noticed in receiver drills, sometimes it's because he's sandwiched between, two really small guys who are really, really quick, but he is stiffer coming in and out of his break still than, a guy bigger than him, like, Bateman and Hopkins obviously are veterans, but even a bigger guy like Keith Kirkwood, who's similarly a little bit of a bigger guy, but looks just smoother coming in and out of his breaks. It's just more development, it's taking the next step and the next step. And he is in a position as a day 3 drafted receiver last year where the Ravens were confident with their top 3 receivers plus Tylan Wallace. This year, again, confident in their top 3, maybe even more so with Hopkins plus Tylan Wallace, that you're not going to ask Devontae Walker even to do too much this year. Quite frankly, it's really building towards next year that I think is a lot more important for his development this year.
I don't disagree with what you said, but wouldn't it be a good thing for the Baltimore Ravens if Tez Walker were to eat DeAndre Hopkins' lunch and become the 3rd receiver?
Yes and no. So here's my thing with that. That would mean one of 2 things, maybe both, has happened. One, obviously, that Hopkins has severely disappointed. and two, that Walker has really, really burst out. And one, I think those two things are unlikely to both happen. They're kind of unlikely. They're not super likely to happen independently, and they're very unlikely to both happen. I think that Walker is going to still have to earn his way onto the field run blocking at the end of the day. And, with the hopes that maybe on some of those heavy reps, he's in as the sole receiver, they're expecting a run and a play action. He gets a one-on-one rep and is able to use that speed to fly free. It would be great, no doubt, if he burst out this year, but I guess I just think he's by far the least proven option among the skill players on the offense. I guess Patrick Ricard is, more of a liability when catching the ball, certainly, but is, much more proven to have an impact in the blocking game. And I just don't quite know where the snaps come from. You asked a great question to Todd Monken a couple weeks ago about the Saints, changing out their 5 eligible receivers on a play. And I'm hoping that Monken really takes the opportunity to keep his guys fresh and, as a result, work Walker in throughout the season instead of just getting him in late in blowout games. That, to me, would be the kind of most likely optimal path for Walker this year. I just struggle to see him really, really breaking out in this offense just because of the scarcity of receiver snaps.
Okay, I'm not disagreeing with that, and Walker could be hurt for a game or two, and that could be the option. And not Walker, Hopkins could be injured for a game or two, and that could be the option, the opportunity for Walker. But we saw some good things in the last game, and the big thing I'll point to initially is that Walker made 2 really good run blocks. One on the run by Mitchell, the other one on the run by Ali. And Hopkins has been a guy who has not been a good run blocker for a long time, and it's been a thing that has been declining in terms of his career. If you look like things like PFF grade or whatnot, that he hasn't been as good a run blocker year over year. If Walker can do that, I think there's a lot more excitement about getting him on the field. And you look to the last year, Tylan Wallace is the guy who was on the field a ton towards the end of the year because of his run blocking.
But it's also for that reason that I think Walker still has to find a way to get on the field, because Wallace has demonstrated that he's earned more snaps. Yeah. Kolar has arguably demonstrated he's earned more snaps, perhaps more than Walker has. And so I think the combination of his inexperience and the more proven weapons on the roster, and the fact that he is the 5th receiver in an offense that uses a lot of heavy formations, it's just a very tough path for him to get snaps. And it would really take a huge breakout from him to get more snaps. And I like what I've seen in training camp, and I think I believe he has a very high ceiling as a receiver because of his athletic abilities. But I think contributing on a down-to-down basis will just be tough because he's not going to be the primary option, even when he is on the field.
Well, fair enough. Let's move on. Let's talk about some of the individual performances in this game. We'll start on the offensive line. Who's a player that you want to talk about?
I think the popular topic we can hit real quick is Daniel Faalele. There's a lot of discourse about Daniel Faalele, and I do think it's worth saying that some of it I think is just kind of toxic in the way that people talk about Daniel Faalele. I think he is a hard worker. I do think that in the NFL, hard work can only get you so far, and that he is going to be the weak link of this offensive line once again this year. The Ravens seem poised to stick with him. There are times when I watch Ben Cleveland, and I do wonder if he would be a more serviceable right guard than Daniel Faalele. But what worried me about Faalele is, particularly on that rep that he got bowled over, is that is a recurring problem that Daniel Faalele should know about when he is facing a smaller athletic lineman, but one who still has power like Adebawore does. To get under his pads the way that he let him with that length is just, to me, the kind of thing that Daniel Faalele should never be letting happen.
Well, I'd like him to use his arms better. There's no doubt about it. I will say this. Anyone who's analyzing this situation ought to be aware of sample size in terms of the significance of it. So 2 things about this. One is he was asked to make a pulling pass block, which is something that he's never succeeded at. And the Ravens coaches need to just take out of the playbook as far as what they ask him to do. That didn't work out. It ended up being a pressure that forced Leary, I think, might have been Rush, to the right in terms of what he was doing. But whichever quarterback it was doesn't really matter. Then the Adebawore play was awful. It's as bad as you can see a guard ever perform in the NFL, but it's one play, and it also is one where he had been the last 309 snaps of 2024. He allowed 2 total pressures. It was like 1.5 in one game and 1.5 in another. 0 quarterback hits, 0 sacks, 0 penalties. At least look at it from that respect and say, hey, there's a lot of evidence going the other direction too. And a 12-snap game has certainly given the opportunity for a lot of Fa'alele haters to come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, and there's a connection between the Fa'alele haters and the Harbaugh haters, and there's all sorts of Ravens fandom politics kind of tied up in that, which is why I started talking about Daniel the way I did. I just think that he is not able to use his length optimally, and that is such a big part of his game as a guard. I guess the reason that Adebawore rep worried me is because it is the kind of really quick loss that Fa'alele is vulnerable to. He is not a guy who loses slowly. I feel like when he loses a rep, it is quick and it is in the quarterback's face very quickly. And
it almost has to be, though, doesn't it, Nick? Because he's so big and he's so powerful that if he doesn't lose quickly, he's not going to lose.
Right. And he latches on. If he latches on, he is able to control blockers. It's one of the reasons why the Ravens moved him into guard was to give him a better chance at latching on in space instead of being out on a tackle against a much quicker edge. But maybe it's just me thinking way into the future when they're facing, the great interior rushers in the playoffs. And Fa'alele needs to be able to slow them down. I'm not going to expect Daniel Fa'alele to block Chris Jones one-on-one, but he needs to slow him down. And I think that's, kind of the consistency that I want to see out of Fa'alele is kind of the fewer swings. I do agree. Showed really clear development last year. The pass protection was a big reason why I think the Ravens wanted to move him to guard. But the kind of the same with Walker. It's wanting guys to take next steps, but not being sure that they have it in them or that it's in the cards for them, or it's within the likely range of outcomes. I just think Daniel Fa'alele is probably going to be still a weak spot on this line. It is what it is. The team has very clearly chosen to make a lesser investment at guard. It is one of the sacrifices of having so much talent elsewhere on the roster. I think for Fa'alele, for me, it's just part of what you said, not putting him in positions that disadvantage him even more. But the other thing is just not getting crushed on some of these pass blocking reps. Because he did look so good last year. And so to see it this year, we have seen it in camp on occasion when he's matched up against the Ravens' better interior defensive linemen where he loses quickly. And it's just going to continue to be a work in progress, which is just concerning to me, given how many times the offensive line has felt like this team's undoing in crucial moments.
Well, he's in year 4, but to your point about the playoffs, I mean, he was outstanding in the playoffs last year. That wasn't a problem at all. I mean, he played Buffalo. Ed Oliver was on, opposite him a fair number of snaps, and he looked great. So I don't really have that problem with Fa'alele. I think that I'm concerned a little bit about the stack he gave up. I'm not surprised at all about the inability to pull into a pass blocking situation. I think the Ravens need to adjust to that. He's a player who has legitimate limitations. The Ravens will have to work with that. But the value you get is a guy who doesn't need to hold, doesn't false start very much. I mean, he had no penalties in the last 7 or 8, 9 games, I think it was, from week 11 on. And is a outstanding pass blocker. He does not have the decisiveness in level 2. And if you're looking for an area of improvement, if you're going to say how is Daniel Fa'alele going to get better, it's I think in making better judgments in level 2, not being lungy. Number 1, trying to use his body as an obstacle for the opponents as opposed to getting lungy, and also deciding who he wants to block. That's a big part of being in level 2, and it's also something that he should be done. I'm bothered a little bit by the fact that he went out to get positional training this offseason, worked with Duke Manyweather, and was supposed to be, in a position probably where he wouldn't have the get under his pads type reps that happened. And then we see one, of course, in the very first preseason game.
Yes, and one other point that you made is knowing how to better use his size just for the space it takes up, and not necessarily there is a weird in the Falele discourse, if you want to call it that, there is a desire for him to play up to his size and be more of a mauler. I don't want him to try and do that, because when he does, he gets lungy. To me, it's more about, can you understand, and I think we talked about this with Okoye, can you understand how your size affects everyone else in how they engage with you, or just how they have to move around you as an offensive lineman, and better position yourself as a result of that? Because there are times when I don't even like, it's his inability to lock onto a moving target that is the issue. Sometimes I feel like he was more comfortable getting to his spots and using himself as a wall to seal off a path for the running back, instead of trying to blow a hole open somewhere. He would be more successful, more consistent in the run game.
Well, let me maybe offer up another suggestion is when he gets into level 2, he can shadow dance with most of the L3 players that are out there, safeties and corners, who may be coming in to try and make a tackle. They don't want to have any engagement with Daniel Falele. All you need to do is threaten that engagement, not lunge to get it. Threaten that engagement.
Exactly.
And he's already the Washington Monument that they need to move around in order to make that tackle.
Right. Like I said, all about the positioning and knowing how to use that size. I just think entering year 4, it is necessary to have a cap on your expectations of where you think he can get to, because he is entering year 4. He has had 3 years of development and a full year as a starter. He showed strides in his full year as a starter, but you're expecting him to build off of that in this training camp instead of trying to just maintain that level.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, by the way, Nick, I think you probably have your 3 MVP awards, but I want to give you a little bit of warning that we're going to get to that. The offensive lineman I was kind of disappointed with was Garrett Dellinger. And Dellinger is a guy who I thought was going to get a chance at center, and then get probably an extended playing time at other places on the line. So he maybe get play at 2 positions. He didn't get that. He played at right guard or left guard, whichever it was.
Left guard. He was the 3rd left guard after Cleveland came out.
Yeah. Okay. So Cleveland came out. So Voorhees, Cleveland, Dellinger was the order. Whereas at right guard, Faalele, then Dalcourt, who has been a guy who's played center and right guard before, and he's ahead of apparently Dellinger on the offensive line depth chart if he's coming in ahead of him at right guard. We heard Warhop speak during OTAs about who was going to get a chance at center. He mentioned Dellinger. That did not happen in this game. Holsky was the guy who got the third center spot. Samac got the second, and then Bullock, of all people, is the first in at center in this game.
Yeah, with Dellinger, I liked that draft pick. I liked taking another player from that LSU O-line. I do feel that he is not just physically not a super high ceiling player. To me, the goal with him was trying to find a backup guard for years 2 through 4. A guy that you would feel comfortable as a backup guard through years 2 through 4. Certainly, as we talked about earlier, the potential for not having Linderbaum next year would make you want to train him up as a center faster. But I do think, again, it's an expectations game with a guy they decided that they drafted so late. Kind of a recurring theme in this draft was that they didn't love some of the talent that was available earlier in day 3, and they moved around later on day 3. And I think that is just representative of, guys like Longer Beam is another example of a late round kind of dart throw that might not be much better than what you're getting from an undrafted rookie free agent. I do think Dellinger's experience makes him the kind of guy that, again, that's why I look at him as I would love to get him as a backup level guard in years 2 through 4, because he has a lot of college experience. He's has a good reputation as a smart player coming out of that LSU O-line room. So I guess for me, my expectations of Dellinger were lower. I wasn't really impressed with what he put out there at left guard. I wasn't super expecting him to get center reps just because we haven't seen that in training camp that much. But as a result, I was hoping he would look better at center because he was a pretty solid starting guard in the SEC going up against the lowest levels of NFL talent that you're going to face in the preseason. I was expecting more.
Okay, so let me address parts of that because you've unpacked a lot of stuff here. The first thing is Dellinger at guard. I actually think that's the lesser value of Dellinger. I think the reason they draft him in the 7th round, the reason you take him over as opposed to trying to get him as an undrafted player, is that
You ever have one of those days where everything's off? Well, Mood can help with that. And let me tell you about Mood. It's the online cannabis brand that is changing the way we handle everything, from stress to sleepless nights, with functional gummies that are 100% federally legal cannabis. Mood launched to make cannabis affordable, accessible, and transparent, while at the same time supporting American farmers growing premium hemp on small pesticide-free farms. Their gummies are next level. Seriously, I've tried a few, and each one feels totally different. The Sleepy Time gummies, out like a light, immediately asleep. The Epic Euphoria, it's perfect when you just need a reset to feel good again. What makes them unique? Mood combines THC with herbs and adaptogens, so you get real targeted effects. You're not going to find this in your typical dispensary. And here's the best part. Mood ships discreetly to most states, offers a 100-day satisfaction guarantee, and right now you get 20% off your first order with the promo code RAVEN. Just head to mood.com. Find your perfect gummy and use the code RAVENS at checkout to save 20%.
Really believe there's a chance that he could replace Linderbaum in 2026. Now, Linderbaum, obviously, no Ravens fan wants to lose Linderbaum, but his cap position might be such that the Ravens can't afford to get him. I think that's also very big possibility for Odafe Oweh that they just can't find the money to sign him. So they need to figure out what are the cheapest alternatives we have in order to replace him in 26. Now, one of the reasonable choices is make a 26 draft pick on a center and take that. But another possibility is make a 25 late round draft pick on a guy you think might become a center at the NFL level. And I think that's why they took Dellinger. I don't think it's necessarily for what he could do at guard. That might work out. It could be where he really helps the Ravens. But I think that the chance that he'll be the center replacement for Linderbaum is probably the biggest reason why they took him in 25.
I guess I just have a hard time seeing him right now as a player who's going to be ready to start in a year. Is the concern I have about him, especially given how little we've seen of him as center. If it were the case that the team is hoping he can come in and potentially be a starter next year, I would want to see more from him that I saw in camp, and certainly on Thursday night. I felt like he was one of the players, one of the reasons why the quarterback struggled with that interior pressure. Again, I think because the issue was across the line, I have trouble really pinning it on one player. You mentioned Samac struggled to pass off that stunt. That seemed to be an issue on a couple of plays. Where the interior lineman got beat by some of the Colts line gains. So I guess I don't want to single out Dellinger as a lineman who was really, really bad, but I think he did disappoint relative to what I was hoping to see, and certainly relative to the expectations that you have for him.
Okay, well, fair enough. Let's move on to the tight end position. Is there a player you'd like to talk about there?
Yeah, I guess let's start with the easy one again. I guess I'll take the easy one again. Charlie Kolar was a little bit surprised that he played multiple drives considering what his status looks to be with Isaiah Likely out. Kind of similar to Mitchell, showed me everything I needed to see very quickly to say that he is all set for a big role to start the regular season. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. One of the many players who's in a contract year and has flown under the radar in that respect. There was a time when the Ravens were coming into this offseason and maybe going to move Mark Andrews, and that would have really put Charlie Kolar in a prominent role heading into a contract year. Now the Isaiah Likely injury is going to give him some early run, and I think that he typically is going to draw, and the same thing happened last year whenever he was running a route. He is going to draw the easiest matchup typically from the opposing defense. And as a guy who is a sneaky good receiver, who came out of college as a receiver and has a reputation in the NFL as a blocker, and as a result of that gets the easy matchups, he is very good at identifying and taking advantage of them. And I think that is going to be quietly a very effective weapon for the Ravens early in the year when Isaiah Likely is out. He may not provide the kind of splash plays that Isaiah Likely gives. Certainly doesn't seem to have quite the connection with Isaiah Likely that with Lamar Jackson that Likely has. Likely has a very, very good feel for Jackson's scramble drills, especially in the red zone. So Kolar might not produce some of those splash plays, but if you're looking for him to contribute consistently as a tight end 2 pass catcher, I think you're going to see it early in the season. We saw it in the preseason game.
Yeah, I think he certainly has the ability to do that. I was very impressed with his run blocking this game. He had a big block on the Ali run and the first of the 2 Mitchell runs. He had a big block in each of those cases, sealing the right edge in on the run for Mitchell. And then he floated out to be a level 0 opportunity for Rush on the play for a 7-yard gain. That wasn't much of anything, but I thought his blocking was outstanding in this game. And a guy who has certainly made his NFL reputation as a blocker. And at Iowa State, the passing game went completely through him. He was Chamberlain of the post in terms of his the ball going to him pretty much every time they had it.
Yeah, I mean, if I can call my shot here a little bit, I think he's going to be the best value tight end in free agency next summer. I think a team is going to sign him, to be a tight end too. And I legitimately think, especially coming up in this Baltimore receiving room or tight end room and learning from George Godsey, who really is just a top-notch tight end coach with the talent that they get through year after year, could emerge as a starting tight end, I think, very quickly on a new team that doesn't have so much other tight end talent ahead of him on the roster. I think there are a number of teams right now that he would immediately be the tight end 2 on and potentially be pushing their starter just because of the untapped potential that he has.
I want to talk briefly about Zaire Mitchell-Payton as well. The door is open for him to earn a roster spot right now. He's a big, athletic-looking tight end who also has the size to make blocks. It's the first tight end off the bench in this game. We also saw a lot of Scotty Washington in the game, but made good blocks in the game. Didn't get a target, which is kind of unfortunate. He's a guy who, if this is his time, I think he gets on the field and he probably takes over the Charlie Kolar role of being more of a blocker, while Kolar moves out to be more of a flex guy that we see in the early part of the season before Likely is ready.
Yep, those early matchups the Ravens have, against the Bills week 1. I forget who's week 2, but
Browns.
The Browns. Week 3, I think, is another tough matchup. Maybe the Lions. I can't quite remember, but they have some tough matchups. They have a pretty tough schedule early in the season. The Ravens do, and I think someone might have even been you asked Todd Monken about going with more 11 early on, and he said, "Yeah, that's kind of something we could do." But the subtext there to me was what they do best is 12. What they do best is running the ball and passing the ball out of heavy formations. And when they're up against good defenses like the Bills, I'm not sure they're going to want to go away from their identity or if they'll find that much success going away from their identity. And so, as you say, Zaire Mitchell-Payton could be in line for early practice squad activations. And depending on what the situation is with Isaiah Likely as we approach roster cutdowns, tight blocking tight ends are a premium. If in this league, teams are typically looking for a solid blocker as their third tight end, and that is a position that we see pilfered on the waiver wire during roster cuts. And so, depending on how the roster math works out, depending on how Isaiah Likely is rehabbing, I think Mitchell-Payton is certainly going to be one of maybe the first choice for a practice squad elevation. But I think in a back end roster spot early in the season, knowing that you're going to want to run those 12 formations as much as you did last year, I could certainly see him making the roster, especially if he continues to block his butt off like he did on Thursday night.
Right. I'll since you mentioned, I'll go through the schedule to start the season, but they play the Bills, the Browns, the Lions, the Chiefs, the Texans, and the Rams the first 6 weeks. So a devastating early season schedule for the Ravens. Mitchell Payton, I think, is the kind of guy, even if you decided that likely goes on IR to start the season and won't be available till week 5, I think Mitchell Payton is a guy you can elevate 3 times and Scotty Washington once if you want to save a roster spot. I don't think it's necessary that anyone is going to take him. Part of his value is the IPPP value that he has, and that only accrues if he's actually on somebody's practice squad. So if you want to put him in your practice squad, then presumably he doesn't have any more value to anybody else that they can take him and put him on the regular roster. So I'm excited about it. Great looking athlete in terms of what he brings to the field.
Yeah, and just another credit we said earlier to that tight end, the coaching in that tight end room to consistently, coach guys up to what makes a tight end, a backup tight end money in this league is run blocking. And so it creates an environment where tight ends who are trying to figure out how to make it in the NFL want to come to Baltimore to get trained up and be part of this offense. Guys like Zaire Mitchell-Payton, undrafted guys like that, year in, year out.
So the wide receiver position, I think, if anything became clear at this from this game, it was that the 6 wide receivers are very much set for the Baltimore Ravens. Who would you like to talk about from this group?
Let's talk about LaJohntay Wester because he is, like you said, the receiver getting the 6th receiver. He is this guy that set the spot. I can't figure out a better way to say that. He is the guy who who kind of made his mark this game, maybe more than any other player in terms of competing for a roster spot. I very much felt like Wester was going to have to show something in the preseason to merit a roster spot because I have not felt like he has been the most effective receiver at camp. From an offensive standpoint, I have not been, we have both been kind of up and down on him as a punt returner. I think for a guy who is tabbed as a punt returner, the number of drops that I've seen in training camp on the punt drills have been less than inspiring. Now that's a small sample size. They do a lot of special teams work. I'm sure that we don't see as they're warming up and we're walking out to the field. So getting those live fire punt reps was so key. We talked in the first part about why those were so impressive. And then talking to him after the game, it was very much like, yes, this is what they brought me here to do. And I proved to them that I can do it. I talked in the first part of the podcast about how important confidence can be, especially for young players. And I think that performance is a real confidence booster for LaJohntay Wester when it didn't really feel like he was separating physically, literally, or, figuratively in the roster battle on the field in training camp.
Great points across the board there, but the Wester punt returns were something that needs to be talked about individually. The first punt return, which was only 17 yards, I thought was actually more impressive than his touchdown punt return. And the reason is he was run into by his own player twice on that return, first by Tampa, then by Kane, in terms of that, it still manages to jitterbug away from the other players. They don't really count missed tackles in the same way. Missed tackles are very common on special teams as opposed to on defense. But they don't have a really good count of those that I'm aware of that's available online. But LaJohntay Wester made a lot of people miss on those 2 punt returns. And he took advantage of his blocks. He had good field vision. While Tampa ran into him, he then made a couple of different blocks on number 35 for the Colts. I'm forgetting who that is, but made two separate blocks on him on the play, who eventually made the tackle. And then the second time around, he forced missed tackles, broke into the clear, and it was over at the 43-yard line. He had 57 yards of celebration to occur on that play, which was just terrific.
What I love to see on that second return was when he got to the second level. So he kind of navigated the initial traffic and broke into free space, but he's at the point of breaking into free space where the walls are kind of closing behind him and players are trying to just slow him. Special teams players are coached. If a guy starts to break free, you gotta get a piece of him. You got to slow him down, dive at his legs, just trip him up so that someone else can come in and bring him all the way down. and he kept his legs churning and he kept his knees up high. And I thought that was like this guy knows how to punt return moment,
Right.
along with the other things that you said, because that is something a punt returner should know. I think it's a topic we've discussed a number of times. Players knowing how other players are going to try to attack them, knowing that guys are going to be coming and diving at your legs to try and catch a piece of you as you're going by, having the high knees and really churning your legs through that contact, I thought was another really impressive part of that punt return.
Now, the punt return ability is what's going to get him on the roster, but I'm really excited about what he can do offensively and come on the field and be primarily a gadget guy. Now, in this game, he was the only target Leary had any success with. He caught balls of 30 and 11 yards, which were the two longest Ravens pass plays of the entire night. The next longest was 9 yards by any receiver. But Wester, I think, is a guy who can take some of the burden off Zay Flowers. Keaton Mitchell can also do some of that in terms of being a guy who splits out wide, is in pony backfields and whatnot. But I think we have a chance to see multiple guys now who could bring that gadget component to the Ravens offense. Yeah,
I want to see Wester more in the slot, kind of like you're saying. I want to see him more in the slot than I feel like I have in training camp. Again, part of that is the Ravens' use of 12 personnel and not always having 3 wide receivers. And even sometimes when they have someone in the slot, it's a tight end on many occasions. And so, again, kind of a limiting factor to how he's able to contribute. But again, if you think about what the investment is in the player in terms of a late round pick, getting a guy who can be an impact punt returner as a rookie and then theoretically on all 4 years of his rookie contract is fantastic. Because once you feel confident about him in that area, not that you're going to stop training him up in that area, but it does allow you to focus on some of the other areas of his game.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's move on. The wide receivers position obviously has a have and have not nature to it. How about the running back position? And let's talk about I don't know that it's a competition anymore between Keaton and Ali, but is there a chance the Ravens keep 4 running backs?
Yeah, I don't think it was ever a competition personally. Just given the fact that Ali never flashed in the first place, that would give him that would put him on. I don't think he was even standing with Mitchell coming in the first place. Nor should he have been, obviously, given what Mitchell did as a rookie. But Ali just so decisive. I think is the word that I've used the most to describe his running, because I think that the cuts, the ability to make the cuts were always there, but sometimes it felt like he was hesitant about exactly which cut to make. And that delay in the processing would just keep him from getting the maximum amount that he can get on his carries. And I think as in the long-term planning of this team, it's always good to have a extra running back just because of the amount that you run the ball. And so even though Ali could not get a single offensive touch for most of the year, given Henry, Hill, and Mitchell ahead of him, having that depth is important because of how much you run the ball. Because if Henry picks up a knock in a game, knock on wood, and relatively unlikely knowing him, not having to go solely to Hill and Mitchell is important to me. Part of that is Henry's a pretty solid pass blocker in his own right, isn't used in that way much. Yeah. That's Justice Hill's role, but Henry is capable of it. Supposing one of the two of them would need to go down, I haven't seen that much pass blocking out of Keaton Mitchell. I think that is something that Rasheen Ali excels at, or is a little bit more comfortable in, has a little bit more of the size for it too compared to Mitchell. And so that could be a big role of his in the season if Henry or Hill, especially Hill, were to miss any short-term amount of time. I think Mitchell would come in and take over Hill's targets as a running back, as a receiving back. But I think that Ali would also spell Mitchell as a blocking back, unless Mitchell, of course, makes some strides there as well.
Right. Well, Ali's had a big problem with drops, and he's not a pass blocker either. He's too small for that. But Mitchell is a guy who one of the things I've been impressed by him was his transition from catch to run in both the preseason, well, really the preseason and camp. Both. I don't think he had a target in this game, but in camp he's been terrific at transitioning from catch to run. I don't think there would normally, under normal circumstances, I don't think there's a reason why the Ravens would carry 4 running backs, because they did so well with 2 last year, and elevating guys from the practice squad to take 0 carries per game, but just be there on an emergency basis. So I think they could go with 2 guys basically, and a third that they activate. But with Mitchell, they're obviously going to keep him. With Ali, the value he gives the team and the value he showed, I think, in this game was in the second kickoff return guy. A guy who can is a running back. Running backs do very well with the zone blocking nature of returns. That seems to be true in the current format. There's going to be a lot more returns that matter when the touchback penalty is at the 35-yard line.
Yes, and kick returning isn't something we hadn't seen. I think this is kind of the thing about the preseason game, and something I've honestly been just missing at training camp is live kick and punt returning reps, and that's why it was so big for Wester. It was so big for Ali this game. With Ali, it didn't seem like on that play he made a ton of guys miss. He did a really good job of following his blocks. But
yes, exactly.
For me, a kickoff returner, that is probably the key thing for a kickoff returner, whereas a punt returner, I'm looking for them to be able to make the first wave of guys miss and then dance into open space. With the kick return, that's more about being confident from the time you catch the ball on where you're going to go, because you got to get going full speed and you can't afford to move laterally. And so he plunged vertically on that, and I thought did a very good job. A little bit of limitation showed with his lack of true breakaway speed on that, but overall, I thought a very good return.
I mean, he was a little bit fortunate that the hole was in the middle of the field, so he ran north, and that hole opened up there. Kane and Braid together had a wonderful block on one of the players. Then he juked left to avoid that, and got slowed down by the kicker, which is the only reason that didn't go for a touchdown. And honestly, a great play from Ali, but not the zone blocking type read that you expect on a kickoff normally. He followed blocks. He did a wonderful job. I don't want to degrade this in any way. But I think, you've got the Ravens have a number of roster situations, and he's threatening to be the fourth running back. And Zaire Mitchell-Payton may not be a guy that they have to have a tight end, which is good. But Carson Vincent is taking up a 10th offensive line spot where he's never going to play. And at outside linebacker, they've got 6 guys for 5 spots right now. At inside linebacker, the combination of Higgins and Martin looked outstanding in this first game. They might be guys who stay on the roster. At the defensive line, they had 3 nose tackles step up and play well, as we talked about, I think, in the first episode. And they might need additional roster spots. The Ravens are facing some very tough decisions coming up, and I'm afraid Ali is going to be a guy who probably drops the top of the practice squad and may not even clear waivers as he is released.
Yeah, after that special teams impact, that's definitely something a team that wants to carry 4 backs, has room to carry 4 backs, would want to add on as their 4th back. It's kind of like you're saying, it's not such an important spot that I think he's a guy I keep on the roster for fear of losing him on waivers. It's more, the math doesn't help, and we might have to let a good player go on waivers, as the Ravens do. Maybe not every year, but close to every year. It does feel like they do have to waive a player who is worthy of a roster spot, usually 1 or 2.
I think it's us putting these players under the microscope and liking certain things about their game that make our guys more important to us, which is good. But the Ravens are genuinely deep, and a lot of other teams are keeping a lot lesser players on their roster than Rasheen Ali, which is just the way it is. Let's move on. Talk about the offensive MVPs from this game. We usually go 3, 2, 1. Who's your number 3 MVP in this game for the offense? And I included special teams in this group as well.
Well, I think that makes it easy in a way. I think then if special teams is included, it's to me kind of tight between the 2 running backs for the 3 and the 2 spot. So I think we could talk about Ali first, since we just left off about him and what he did on the field. You talked about the kind of the peculiarities of that kick return. My one counter to that is, yes, it was a non-peculiar kick return. He read it properly and didn't try and move laterally to find whatever gap was supposed to be there. The decisiveness to just plunge forward and get the yards, and kind of once he got to the second level, almost looked like he was like, oh, I have a big gain. I have a big hole opening up to my left. But I thought getting the initial yards was obviously literally half of the battle. But I think as a kick returner, just getting the not running side to side as a kick returner is something that I really worry about. And with Ali, that decisiveness that I've seen in training camp really showed up on that kick. And then the run, I don't think we even really talked about the one run that he had that I thought was another really good cuts on that run to weave through traffic and avoid catching those flyby tackles, just keeping himself out of arm's reach of the defenders that were engaged in blocks so that they couldn't slow him down on his way through the hole. Was making himself, felt like he did a good job making himself skinny on that play. Again, like we just talked about, it's a very difficult roster decision, and it would be very easy if he continues this performance in the preseason, especially because he's probably going to get a good number of reps in the next few games. If he continues the performance, that you could certainly see a team say, hey, that's a guy we liked a couple years ago in the last year in the draft. He looks like he's developing really well. Let's go at him as our RB4.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think he's in big risk if he goes. I want to say one other thing about one other run that went kind of unnoticed. It was a good run on the 19-yard run that got him down to the 2-yard line or whatever it was that he eventually put the ball in. But it was a really good run that he had where he got almost caught 2 yards in the backfield, forced a missed tackle there, and then ran for 7 yards. That was a really nice play. And I think it's undervalued in terms of what happened there, but Ali certainly did his job. And if I'm looking at how he followed his blocks and what he did on plays, I think that's one of the ones I would point to. He had 4 missed tackles in the game and only 9 carries. That's a terrific relationship between those two for an NFL running back in particular. And Mitchell had the exact same 4 out of 9 relationship. So yeah, Ali also my number 3 MVP in this game.
Yeah, and the touchdown as well. It was a 2-yard touchdown, but he got hit well before the goal line. And something I noticed on Mitchell's run as well, I'm sure we're going to talk about him in a second, was the way that he angled his body to make sure that the ball got across the goal line before his knees touched the ground. And that's a subtle thing, but we see would-be touchdowns get called back because a player let their knee hit the ground. And so he did a really good job kind of getting horizontal as the tacklers were engaging him, and getting horizontal and keeping his knees up. It kind of looked like he kind of went in the end zone almost parallel with the goal line and horizontally too, staying up through that contact. I just like to see that out of a second-year player getting an opportunity like that.
Yeah, running backs in particular know how to elevate their knees and get basically horizontal to the ground, or perpendicular to the ground. I'm not sure which is the geometric term to use here. So that you'll see them be very flat as they dive, and do a good job with that. Okay, well, Ali's my number 3 guy. Who's your number 2 guy?
Keaton Mitchell is the number 2 guy in terms of the MVP of this game of the guys who's going to be most important this season. He's definitely number 1. Another example, like we just talked about on that touchdown run, Keaton Mitchell, the agility, the acceleration, the long speed is all so amazing. The cuts, to his ability to erase pursuit angles, but his most underrated quality in 2023 was his ability to have tacklers bounce off his legs as he was running, and his contact balance to keep that from slowing him down, and gaining steam through those tackles. I felt was showed up big time on a couple runs that didn't go so far, but he kind of still churned through to get some yardage after a blown block. And of course, those 2 big rows, 2 20-yard runs, including the touchdown, which was really just a physical, gritty effort from a guy coming off an injury, from a kind of glass-eating football standpoint. That's what you want to see. That's what you want to see from Keaton Mitchell coming off an injury. It's not just, oh, he's fast. He is still initiating contact. He is still running through contact. And again, just the contact balance that you see from him with you talked to, I think you mentioned this in the first part where we talked about in training camp, he's the best player on the field. And, if defenders can touch him, they can't wrap him up. They're supposed to wrap him up, and they can't wrap him up in these practices. Yep. And I think that is also a testament to his contact balance and his ability to shake some of those more feeble arm tackle attempts that would trip up a lot of other speedy but kind of smaller running backs like him.
Yeah. It definitely has that contact balance that we associate maybe with Ray Rice in this town, of guys who are low to the ground. Ray Rice had a special ability to put one hand on the ground and keep going, go to the tripod. But Mitchell, I thought there were about the 2 runs he had, the 22 and the 23, and I don't even know anymore which order they are. I think it might have been 23, 22. But the first one was an outstanding follow the blocks, bounce outside, make the run there. The second one, he just had enormous burst going through the hole when the C gap opened, and he knew exactly where to go. And then he got into level 3, really not level 2, even level 3. And there were 3 guys between him and the goal line. It almost looked like Gandalf facing the 3 doors in the Fellowship of the Ring in terms of which way he wanted to go there. And he decided he'd go towards Walker's side. And that he literally went that way. Walker made a great block to take his man out of the play, and then Mitchell ran through the tackle of Wooler, who has looked like he's going to be all pro in his rookie year, based on what we've seen in the joint practice and this game. In fact, I think he led them in tackles. They had the 2 interceptions in the 2-minute drill against the Ravens in the joint practice.
Yeah, and that. I might feel like a broken record here. I think it's something I've been saying about Keaton Mitchell for a while, but it is that completeness of a running back that makes him so dangerous, and more than just a pure speed outside zone, get him the ball in space and let him run kind of guy. He is a guy who can operate between the tackles and find space and play with some grit despite his size. And I think that completeness of him as a running back, in a way, yes, Derrick Henry is in town. It's not the best for Keaton Mitchell's kind of early career ability to pop. But if you think about running backs in the NFL in the long term, he has had one major injury and seems to have been able to put it behind him. In the long term, not having a ton of tread on his tires in the first four years of his career might be good for him, especially someone who's so reliant on his athletic abilities.
Yeah, might certainly help. And it's a there's been talk. I've seen a lot of chatter on Twitter the last few days about the inability to get him on the field, and there's a lot of quotes of Monken, saying that, boy, he's going to have a real hard time getting touches. We're there at camp every day. All I can say is this: first of all, Mitchell's the most impressive athlete in camp in terms of being all over the field and cutting like you never see out of a running back. Like running backs, very hard to tell how well they're playing in camp because they all run through contact. They're always trying to run for the touchdown on every play because they're not in there generally on the next play. And with Mitchell, it's been a matter of he makes these cuts that are like a video game. They're like a cheat code in a video game that all of a sudden he makes a right turn and you're like, how the hell did he do that? He's just a very different kind of player than other running backs. It is apparent like how great he is in camp as opposed to, I know there was a lot of years ago, let's talk about Buck Walker being a great back and having a great training camp or other players that we've talked about. I've never seen anything like what we've seen from Keaton Mitchell this camp.
Yeah. And you can go back to the 2023 season and see what he did in those games and say, if he is that player, he will be on the field. And then you talk about what we feel like he's added as a pass catcher this offseason. To me, I think that makes it even easier to get him on the field. Certainly some percentage of Derrick Henry's carries are going to go to Keaton Mitchell this year. It won't be a giant number, nor should it be. But I think between that and his ability to maybe eat into Justice Hill's role as a change of pace back, he's not going to take over that third down back role. Justice Hill is so good in that role. But as a change of pace back and maybe on some earlier passing downs. So like on some third downs, when you know the defense is pinning their ears back and maybe bringing pressure, you keep Hill in. But maybe second and longs, to me, is a really good opportunity to have Mitchell in to threaten both a chunk play through the air or on the ground.
Okay, so two things about this. First of all, I said Buck Walker, and I meant Buck Allen. I think probably people got that. But the other thing is the notion that you can't get him on the field is ridiculous. I mean, obviously, with Isaiah likely out, in fact, the Ravens are going to need a player who can add something to the offense. And Mitchell adds tremendous misdirection value to the offense. You don't have to use him at running back. You can use him at flanker. You can have him be the motion guy who comes through the backfield, threatens jet motion, and that has to be respected given what a talent Mitchell is. If you don't, do so at your own peril, because once in a while he's going to get the ball and he's going to run for 40 yards. He's a tremendous talent. I think you can use him in a two running back backfield and Nick Henry the fullback. I think you can use him for misdirection. I think you use him in the flanker, but I know this, that whatever Monken is saying about how difficult it's going to be to get Mitchell in the game is complete horseshit. He's going to get Mitchell in the game because Mitchell is one of the most talented offensive players, and he'll find a way to make him exploit the defenses in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think Monken talks about it as a puzzle he's kind of excited to solve. I do think there's a sense of gamesmanship and not wanting to tip the hand too much, an element of that in there. And I also think there is a reflexiveness not to make it seem like you're taking the ball away from Derrick Henry, because you don't want it to look that way, even if it's kind of going to be that way for a player who is well worth the snaps, especially given, my goodness, can you imagine having to mentally switch between defending Derrick Henry and Keaton Mitchell on consecutive plays? Just the mental gymnastics of how these players run and how they can threaten you. And so, yeah, I mean, talent gets you on the field, no doubt. I mean, it's like when Isaiah Likely was lighting up camp really since he was a rookie, but the last two off seasons, the last two training camps in particular in 23 and 24, where, we got Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is fantastic. Career high efficiency last year. He had a really, really good year last year. But that doesn't mean Isaiah Likely wasn't on the field and making plays, because they find a way to get the most talented players on the field. Now, the math is harder for Mitchell than maybe it was for Likely, given what the Ravens like to do on offense, and given, yes, the Ravens added an extra receiver who's probably going to get more snaps than Nelson Aguilar got. But talent wins out. And like I said about earlier in the program about running multiple tight ends earlier in the season against that tough gauntlet of opponents earlier in the year, when you're going to need to rely on your identity is going to be partially running the ball with Keaton Mitchell and getting the ball in his hands. Because I would rather the Ravens get the ball in his hands, as much as I like Charlie Kolar, but Mitchell should have the ball in his hands way more often than Kolar, just based purely on what we've seen in training camp.
Right. It's a combination with him of getting the ball in his hands and seeing how devastating he is, which that is no small thing. But also in the defend every blade of grass nature of the Ravens offense, in the fresh legs nature of the Ravens offense, Keaton Mitchell, incredibly important player coming up in 2025. And it was really, in a lot of ways, losing Keaton Mitchell in 23 was like the Titans losing CJ 2K in 2008 in terms of just how devastating it was to their chance to go forward. The Titans were 14-2 during the regular season. The Ravens went down there and they didn't beat the snot out of them. They won the turnover battle and had 3 of those, and they they basically frustrated them in the same way they did in 2000.
Yeah, and so with Mitchell in 23. The way I felt about Mitchell in 23 was, look at how much the Ravens have gotten out of your Latavius Murray. And I love Gus Edwards. We love Gus Edwards in Baltimore, but certainly not the most physically gifted back that could take advantage of the open space that Lamar Jackson provided. Mitchell finally was that. Maybe we had J.K. Dobbins, but all the injuries, Dobbins was probably the closest the Ravens had before Keaton Mitchell in terms of really being able to exploit the space that Jackson opens up. But in Mitchell, you finally have that. And Henry again showed this year, you can have a great rushing offense with Lamar Jackson and an average running back. You can have a historic one, a world-beating rushing offense with Lamar Jackson and running backs that can take full advantage of the space that he provides, and the gravity that he sucks in the opposing defenders. And so Mitchell is just so obviously a guy who, again, I don't want to make this seem like I'm speaking ill of Justice Hill. Justice Hill is an extremely, extremely good football player, but in terms of explosive potential, and especially I think like long-term potential, I'm not sure if Mitchell will ever be necessarily a bell cow, but I think he certainly has RB1 talent to lead a backfield. Mitchell has that. He just has the next level, unteachable athleticism and unteachable feel for the running back position at such a young age.
Well, one of the nice things about this is Mitchell's presence gives an opportunity to reduce Henry's workload. And no matter what people want to say about Derrick Henry, given his age, it just makes sense to do that. So Mitchell is not necessarily the third down back. I don't think he necessarily takes carries away from Justice Hill, who's still the guy you want in there as a pass blocker on third down, a very gifted receiver as well, who's got a nose. He sniffs out the first down line like a lot of other backs sniff out the goal line in terms of what's going on. I don't think he's necessarily the loser in this situation at all. I think it's Henry going down from 300 plus carries to 285 that gives Mitchell a lot of his carry load.
Yeah, and I think, Hill served that change of pace role as a ball carrier last year as well. He wasn't just in for, 2 minute and third down. I think those are the touches that Mitchell takes away from him. But the 2 minute, maybe Mitchell contributes more in the 2 minute. I'd be curious to see what that looks like. But Hill he's just so entrenched in those roles as he should be, as a pass catcher and as a trusted blocker in that backfield. Like you said, has a nose for the first down line. In a way that Mitchell has a nose to get in open space and pick up explosive gains. So it is really Todd Monken is kind of in an offensive coordinator's dream spot with these skill positions. I think it's easy to exaggerate about the Ravens early on, but Mitchell, we've seen it. It's not like this is a rookie who had explosive gains in college. This is a guy who knows how to run at the NFL level.
Right. All right. We spent a lot of time here, and I need to wrap this show up quickly. But our number one, your guy, I'm assuming is my guy as well. Anything else you need to say about LaJohntay Wester?
I don't think so. We covered the punt returns. I think we talked a little bit in the first episode about what was really impressive about that long catch down the field, the late adjustment to the ball, getting the separation in the first place, but the late adjustment to a bad ball, as many were on Thursday night. To me, was the kind of thing that I haven't seen from him during camp. And so seeing both the punt returns as kind of a proof of concept of him as a returner and as an explosive one who can turn kind of medium gains into, no gain into medium gains and medium gains into huge ones. That was big, but also just seeing him do something as a receiver that was more than running away from a defender on a crossing route, I thought was really good.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on both elements. I will say the one thing I'll add as a punt returner is he's not the sort of guy who runs away from the defense in terms of out racing the defense. He's a guy who just is incredibly hard to get down in a single space. They had on the first punt return, they had 4 guys literally completely around it. I freeze the frame. I mean, they're literally in the perfect position to contain him, and they can't do it. And that's despite the fact that the play starts off with TJ Tampa running right into him and continues on with Kane running right into him. So it was one of the great punt returns I've ever seen. It was only 17 yards, but the next one when he didn't have the run into players, there wasn't any question about it. He was off to the races. Just a very, very exciting punt return pair there in terms of Wester. And like the 63-yard field goal from Loop, it's probably been 10, 11 days ago now at camp. It's a single event that has completely obliviated or removed any choice of who's going to be the guy. They've had 4 guys returning punts this year. None of them have a chance to now be the guy on the roster who does so over Wester.
Yeah, it's his job to lose. And one final note I have on Wester is in receiver drills, I noticed that he has really good work, really good footwork, really fast feet. And there are times when I feel like that doesn't translate at the break point, whatever the right term is, when he's running
top
routes.
Of the stem.
At the top of the stem. Thank you. It's getting late. At the top of the stem, when he's running routes, I don't feel like that footwork always translates. But in the punt return, we saw it. We saw the footwork, didn't get tripped up. I think I've talked a couple times about the high knees to keep any of those straggling tackles from getting him and slowing him down. And that allowed him to explode into the open space and outrun everyone at the goal line. Just the first electrifying moment of the 2025 season for the Ravens. And it was very cool. It was very cool to see it at home. Very, very cool for a rookie to get that his debut.
All right. As always, Nick, I appreciate, being by your side at camp and talking football with you there. Great discussion tonight. And honestly, this is a 2-hour and 45-minute discussion about an offense that didn't really move the ball that well, which has been a lot of fun. Always love talking football with you. Tell folks where they can find your work online or talk to you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X at Nik, Nik, knows ball. So you can find me there. Love, been doing a lot of training camp updates. Always happy, if people have questions, things they want to know, always happy to try and find that out. I also write for Rustry Report. That's where you can find a lot of my written work. And same to you, Ken. It's such a pleasure to be next to you at training camp and have someone with the experience and knowledge that you have ask me questions. Always makes me feel good because it's like, oh wow, Ken thinks my opinion is important, and so that always makes me feel good coming from someone like you.
All right, I appreciate that, Nick. Other folks out there, hit me up with a DM if you'd like to do a film study short. And as always, please try and pass this show on to the next person who you think might like it. I know we have a high STEM audience here. From the questions I get, there's a lot of people who are very either mathematically inclined or they're just analytically inclined, whatever it might be, however you want to say that thing. Think about the next person who might like this podcast, and I'd appreciate if you do that. Like and subscribe on YouTube, and that will drive people to the show. Nick, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.